Hello, this screencast is to introduce you to creating graphs in Polygon. I've produced it to support students studying on the Master's Degree Programme in Clinical Gait Analysis at the University of Salford, but assume it's going to be of use to a wider group of people as well. In this first screencast, I just want to look at how we plot the gait graphs. Polygon's capable of doing a great deal more than this, and maybe at some time in the future I'll do another screencast that contains instructions as to how to do some of the other things that are possible. So first of all, we need to go to the desktop and open Polygon up by double-clicking on the icon. Exactly what you see when the software opens up will depend on how you left it. And you'll see various elements on the screen here, and I'll show you how to turn them on and off. Basically, if you use this little blue button at the top, it allows you to show or hide all the toolbars. So I can go and hide the ribbon, which, as you can see, is that area at the top of the screen. The tools on the ribbon allow you to do various things with the report, and they change depending on which of the particular menu items you click. The panel down the left-hand side is the data bar, and this is the place where we'll see a record of which particular C3D files you're trying to analyze, and indeed, if you want to use video, which video files you've got. The panel on the right-hand side is called the attributes bar. You'll see a little bit more about that later on. And then the panel down at the bottom is the time bar. Okay. And then right down the bottom you can see the status bar, which sometimes has useful messages on it. And if we want to turn them all off and see the whole report, we can just toggle all. But most usefully, when we're generating reports, we want to see all of the tools. Each of these panels can be detached by just dragging it to somewhere else on the screen. And if you want to lock it back, you have to drag it onto those little square icons that have come up. And we can do this with any of these tools that we've got here. Now, in the center of the screen, you'll see the data management tool. And the way we either hide or view this is using this icon on the ribbon when we've got the home menu selected. So if I click on that, the data management tool will disappear, and if I click on it again, the data management tool will come back. Now I'm choosing to illustrate this with the data that comes as standard for tutorial purposes as this version of Polygon. And you can see it's got data from 4 subjects, and what I want to do is I want to select the data from Beth, so I'm going to expand this tree, and it's got some normal gait data, and you can see we've got a total of what looks like either 6 or 7 C3D files here. Now, it's always a good idea to put your Polygon reports close to the data that it's relating to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on Beth to highlight her as a subject, and then I'm going to click the new report icon. And you can see that it's come up with a suggested name. I'm just going to delete the one. So it's suggested that the name of this report should be my first Polygon report, which sounds quite a good idea. And then I'm going to again double click on that to open that report up. Now, it gives me the choice to base that on an existing Polygon template or to have a completely new document. And in order to teach you how this works, I think it's best to start with a blank sheet of paper or a blank Polygon report. So I'm going to say no. Okay. Now, I don't need the data management bar for a little while now, so I'm going to just click the top right-hand corner of it and get rid of it. And what you can see now is this report pane in the middle of the window is essentially a little word processing pad. So I can go in and I can type in, this is a Polygon report, or anything else I might want to. As with any word processor, I can go and change the font, something a bit more modern perhaps. I can change the size of that font. I can make it bold, I can underline it, I can change its color. I can basically just use it as a word processor. And then I probably want to come back to a slightly smaller font without bold and underlining, and I'm going to go back to black and say this is my report. Now, of course, the great power of Polygon isn't that it's a word processor, it's that it enables you to show gait data. So the next thing we want to do is we want to pull in some gait analysis data. So I'm going to go to Home, and I'm going to get the Data Management tool. And you can see that we've got these gait trials. 2 of them are static trials, and another 4 of them are data that's been processed with plugin Gait, I think. And what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to double click on the little P icon. Okay, and you'll see as soon as I do that, that the file appears in the data bar. So that's quite straightforward. And for the moment, I'm just going to, again, hide that data, and we're going to have a look at it once it's in the data bar. And the important thing is now the data has been imported to the Polygon report. So it's now part of the report rather than just a file that's floating on your computer somewhere. We can expand the tree structure, and you can see that it's got areas of analog data, force plate data, events, and then most of the data is stored under the subject's name called Beth. So we can expand that. Okay, and you can see we've then got within this tree we've got the trajectories and the display sets, but most importantly what we're going to look at the moment is the kinematic data. Okay, and I'm particularly interested today in looking at the joint angles. Now when I get down to this level, you'll see that in the panel beneath I start getting a listing of the actual data I've got available. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the 12 gait graphs that we base most of our clinical gait analysis upon. I'm going to just double click on the pelvis angles. Oops, sorry, double click. Okay, and you can see that the graphs come up in what is now the graph pane. And if I double click on this pane, I can toggle between seeing all 3 graphs at once, double click again, and just seeing one of those particular graphs. For the moment, we'll just concentrate on one of the graphs. So I double click again and get that one graph in. And I want to show you how this behaves on the time bar. So at the moment, we're looking at the graph of pelvic rotation throughout the gait cycle. And the data from the left side is plotted in red, and from the right side is plotted in green. And those 2 colors correspond to the colors of what are called the contexts in the time bar. So the left context is in red and the right context is in green. Now you can see that if you've labelled the stuff appropriately in Workstation, then the gait cycle events are brought through, and as I go through the gait cycle, you'll see that there's a red line shows me on the graph where I am in time, and then once I get into the stage where there is a right gait cycle to display as well, I have 2 bars that are moving across the screen showing me time for the left and right. Now you'll see that as I cross over from one gait cycle to the other, I'm doing it from the first red gait cycle to the second red gait cycle, of course the pelvic rotation graphs change a little bit, because from step to step there's going to be a little bit of variability within the trial. You'll see here I'm coming into the transition between the 2 right cycles, and the green graph changes a little bit. I'm coming here to the transition between the 2 red cycles, and again the red changes a little bit. If you've got a cycle that's filled in red, it means you've got kinematic and kinetic data there. If it's just outlined in red or green, then it's showing you that you've got kinematic data only. Now we can actually toggle through those and either turn off the kinematics or kinetics if we want by double clicking on those. So I actually like to set up the graph so there's only one gait cycle for each trial, and that means I know exactly which cycle it is that we're looking at any particular time. So I'm going to double click on this gait cycle here, and it disappears from the graph. I'm going to double click on this gait cycle here, and I'm going to double click on this one. So I'm left with just the 2 gait cycles where I've got kinetic and kinematic data. And you can see that wherever the time bar is now, it's displaying the graphs from that particular gait cycle. And if the time cursor is within the gait cycles, it will give me those lines on the screen, allowing me to look at the graphs themselves. Now, one of the very important parts about Polygon is the ability to create hyperlinks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a hyperlink to this graph. This is the pelvic rotation graph. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the word pelvic rotation. I'm going to highlight the word, and I'm going to couple up to global link here, and I'm going to say yes, I do want that to be a hyperlink. Okay. Now I'm going to go onto the tab that shows me pelvic obliquity, and I'm going to create another hyperlink here. Okay, so type in pelvic obliquity, go to global link, and accept the yes. And now what happens if I click on the original pelvic rotation hyperlink, you'll see that I go to the pelvic rotation graph, pelvic obliquity goes to the pelvic obliquity graph, and you can guess that I'm finally going to get a pelvic tilt graph. So I'm going to go to the pelvic tilt, I'm going to create the hyperlink, and that means that I'm saved now so that I can always come back to pelvic tilt, pelvic obliquity, or pelvic rotation. I can actually even close that pane down, and then I can use the hyperlink to restore that pane exactly as it is when I created it. Now, of course, for most gait analysis purposes, we don't want to have just a single graph. We want to look at an array of graphs. So I'm going to double click it and get it into its array output. And I like to look at these on an array of 3 columns wide for sagittal, coronal and transverse plane, and 4 columns high for pelvis, hip, knee and ankle. So I'm going to go to the thumbnail layout here. I'm going to select the layout, and it's got a number of different options. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want 3 columns of graphs and I want 4 rows of graphs. Okay. Also note down the bottom that I can choose whatever aspect ratio I want. This is the ratio of the height to the width of the graphs, and I personally always choose it to be 0.75, and I find it makes my data interpretation easier if I just stick with that value. So when I do this, you'll see that the graphs start distributing themselves in a grid that's 3 by 4. And if I right click and drag on any of these graphs, I can move it to a new location. Okay, so I'm right clicking and dragging. Now, of course, what I want to do is I want to go and add the other graphs. So I'm going to look for the hip angles, double click, and they're going to appear. And notice one of the slightly annoying things about Polygon is when you do this, you lose the order in which you originally arranged them. So the best thing to do is to get the graphs you want up first. I'm going to have the knee angles as well, and I'm going to have the ankle angles. And the one thing is that I don't find the ankle ab and adduction graph particularly useful, so I can just drag it off the screen. And instead of that, I'm going to add the foot progression angle. Now, if I only want one graph, I can right click on the foot progression angle entry here, and it will give me some choices. And I can go for just one of the components. So I can go for the third component and just add it to the chart. Okay. And you'll see that it's added as the last graph there and shuffled everything around. So the next thing I have to do is I have to just swap these graphs over. So when I do the right click and drag, it's going to swap the 2 graphs. So I'm going to move the pelvic obliquity up to where it needs to be. I'm going to bring the pelvic rotation up to where it needs to be. I'm going to find hip flexion, move that up to where it needs to be. Hip abduction, hip rotation, knee flexion, knee ab and adduction, knee rotation, foot progression and angle rotation, and this is the order in which I quite like to look at the graphs. Now, one of the things you'll see is that the way we've plotted it here, there's quite a lot of white space around them. In fact, there's more white space than there is graph. So I can go up to the thumbnails and pull down the menu, and the amount of space you've got around the graphs is determined by these 2 numbers. So I'm going to set that to 0 and the left and right margin to 0 and press OK, and we say we get better graphs. Now this is all working quite well so far. So the first thing I want to do now is I want to put a hyperlink in to save it, because it's one of the best ways of making sure that we don't lose anything that we've done. So rather than graphs, Gait graphs. Okay, so if I go onto there and click the global link, you'll see I can now toggle. I can either go and look at pelvic rotation from the hyperlink I created earlier, or I can go and look at the great graphs I've just sorted out for myself. Now, there may be some things that you don't particularly like about the look of these graphs, and there's a lot of scope for customizing these to tidy them up. So, for example, you'll notice that all the labels have been fitted corresponding to how long the words are, and we might want to tidy those up and maybe put them in a different color. So these are the graph title properties, and you'll see right over on the right hand side of this there's 3 little dots, and if you click on those 3 little dots, there's a dialog box will come on to allow you to change some things. So for example, I can change the code of these. I can make the labels a little bit smaller. I can change the color. Okay, if I wanted to, I could edit the label there. Now, if I want to apply the font to everything, I can tick this box. Otherwise, I can leave it and it'll just apply to the particular graph that I'm looking at. Okay. It's also possible to change the labels on the y-axis. So I'm sure we get the idea of this now. We go to the right-hand side of this where the three little dots are. We open up the dialog box, which allows us to select a font, allows us to select a size, allows us to select the color, and then you'll see it allows us what are the strings we're going to put in here. So the top string is this thing that is ant or up or int for each of the graphs. The middle string is in degrees for all of these, and the bottom string gives us post, down, and ext, and correspondingly. And we've got various choices that we can put in there. And again, we can just click OK, and we get the graphs all nicely laid out in a common format now. Now, so seeing that the format now is a lot nicer than it was before, we might want to go and change that hyperlink. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click it this time, and I'm actually going to replace the link. Okay, and it asks me, am I really sure I want to do that? Because hyperlinks are really quite important and quite valuable, and you don't want to destroy them if you're by mistake. But I'm going to press yes, and it's going to see. So now when I toggle between pelvic tilt and the gait graphs, I get the newly formed. Now you may be interested in displaying more than one set of data on this particular set of graphs. So the first thing we're going to have to do if we want to do that is to go and get the data. So I'm going to collapse the tree for normal gait 3. I'm going to go to home and I'm going to open up the data manager. And then I'm going to try and add the data for normal gait 4. So I'm going to double click on the P. And you should see that the data gets imported into the data bar and therefore into the report and appears in the data bar. And I'm going to do the same for C3D file 5 as well. Okay, then I'm going to close that. Now the neat trick is that we don't have to go through all that again. We can just go and right click on the normal gait and it says, do I want to add the normal variables to the graphs? Okay, and you'll see what's happened here. I've now ended up with 2 traces for each of the variables, and I can go and add in a third trace here and add those normal variables to graph. So I've got 3 rights and 3 lefts here, and the first thing I'm going to do, because I want to save this, is have a hyperlink that enables me to toggle between those. You'll see that I didn't quite hit the full version of 3 traces, so the hyperlink is only extended through part of the word. It's actually possible to edit within the hyperlink. Okay, so I can just tidy that up if I want to. But now I can go between the gait graphs for a single cycle and the gait graphs for 3 cycles. I can also go and I can double click on the knee flexion extension graph, and you'll see that I can effectively blow up that graph and make it bigger and look at it in a bit more detail. If I really want to be tidy, what I'll also go and do is I'll go and look at the events for each of these. So this is the event for the second trial, and you'll see when I double click on this, the time bar is going to change. Okay. So we see here that we've only got kinematic data. There's no kinetic data for this particular, for the left side. So I'm going to turn off one of those cycles. I'm going to turn off the kinematic data for the first of the right gait cycles. I'm also going to do that for the next gait cycle. So go to events, make sure that we're displaying the left and the right for this particular one. There's good kinetic data here for a left and right cycles. So I'm going to double click to turn off all of those. So now you'll see that none of those traces change at all during the particular gait cycles that we're looking at. So I'm going to close these down to make them a little bit tidier. You can actually put, I don't even know if there's a limit to the number of C3D files you can put in the data bar. I've certainly had reports where I've had 70 or 80 trials and they've all appeared there without any great problem. So let's double click on the graph pane, and we'll get the nice array of graphs. And probably the first thing we need to do now is, starting to get quite a nice report, is to save it. So I'm going to go up, I think, to the P option, and I'm going to save the report. one of the things I'd like to show you is just how easy it is to export the data. Now you've formatted it quite nicely, so if I just go onto the graphs and I right click the graphs, one thing I can do is I can copy the data to clipboard. Now I'm going to then open up a Excel spreadsheet that I've got open already. Just open a new one. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go to somewhere on the trial and I'm going to right click and I'm going to paste. And you'll see that all of the data that came out of the Gait graphs has been printed on this Excel spreadsheet. Basically it's spaced so that there's 51 samples across the Gait cycle across the top. If you open this one, you'll see that it tells us whether that's coming from C3D file 3 or 4 or 5, whether it's coming from the left or right, and which particular joint angle we've got and what it's measured in. So if you want to do any subsequent analysis in Excel, you can get the data out very quickly in this particular way. So that's exporting to Excel. You can also export to Word. So we'll go and open up a blank document in Word. I can quite simply go and right click and paste if I want, in which case I'll get the numbers in Word, which actually aren't particularly useful. So I'll just use the undo key for that and actually paste them in a slightly different way. If I go to paste and then paste special, I get the option of pasting these as a picture, and in which case they'll be inserted into my Word document simply as the graphs that we've had in Polygon. So I'll close that down. No real need to save it. I'll close Excel down. No real need to save it. And just bring you back to the Polygon report. I'm going to save that once more. I was just going to finish there, but I realize there's one thing I've forgotten to explain, and that's how to adjust the scaling on the graphs. So if I go and click on the graph view, you'll see that again I get up the attributes for the particular graphs, but this time I'm going to look at the pelvic tilt graph, which I actually like to plot between 0 and 60 degrees rather than -20 and 40 degrees. So to do this, I go and click on the graph, but then I go and click on the labels on the axis, and you can see that this gives me details of what's happening on the y-axis, and I can go and change the axis properties. So I can click here and then click on the 3 little dots, and you can see that it allows me to change the range from -30, sorry, I set it like 0 to +60. Okay. Then I can come down here. I also like to do pelvic obliquity on the range between plus and -30. So I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to click on the y-axis. I'm going to edit its, oh sorry, I've got its labels rather than its properties. So let's go back. I want the axis properties, and I'm going to change this from -30 to +30. Okay. And I think you can imagine that I can go through all of the graphs and tidy them up a bit. Hip abduction, for example, I quite like to be between 30 and -30 again. And in this way, I can build up a set of graphs that are plotted on the axes that I like to look at. So the final thing I'm going to want to do is I'll probably want to upgrade that link, seeing as I've upgraded the graphs. Do I want to change that? Yes, I do. And then I'm going to want to just close the report. Okay, it's saved it there, and you'll see that it's sitting exactly where I created it. And if I want to open it up again, I can just double click on that, and you'll see it opens up, and then I can just close it down again. So I hope that's given you an introduction as to how to use Polygon to create great graphs, and how you can use it both to visualize the graphs within Polygon and also to export it to Word and Excel. And hopefully in doing that, I've introduced you to quite a lot of tools that you can explore for yourself and learn to use to the fullest of the product. So go away and play with it and learn how to use it even better.